और अब मैं अनुरोध करता हूं माननीय वित्त मंत्री जी से कि वो अपनी बात रखें। श्री अरुण जेटली जी, माननीय वित्त मंत्री।
The secretaries of the Ministry of Finance, the Chief Economic Advisor, the President of the three Chambers of Commerce, who are all here, officials, captains of industry, ladies and gentlemen. This government has now been in office for a little over 2 years and 8 months. And we've had an opportunity to present 4 union budgets. And if you look at the changes which have come about in this period of 2 years and 8 months in the 4 budgets, that budgets are no longer being looked at as an exercise where we merely tinker with some duties, but have actually become policy documents which guide the direction into which the country's economy is to move. Not only in these 4 budgets, but almost round the year, I can comfortably claim that every decision that the government has taken has been in the direction of reforming and improving upon the present systems. Whether it was to target subsidies to the more deserving, or it was to end discretions, or it was to ease the process of doing business, or rationalize taxes, or cleaning up the system. Each decision which we have taken can actually be termed as a reform in its own rights. And I think what is more important than that is that not a single decision have we taken which goes contrary to this larger roadmap that we are trying to follow. So as far as the direction is concerned, we are absolutely clear about it. The 3 changes that we made this year, each one of them was dictated by good reasoning. Why did the railway budget have to be discontinued and merged with the union budget? It was an exercise undertaken since 1924, a year in which the size of the railway budget was much bigger than the size of the union budget. Today, what we spend on national highways or what we spend on defense is bigger than what we spend on railways. And therefore, the rationale of continuing a separate budget for the railways and then packing it with populist announcements which historically were not implemented was not considered a very useful exercise. So railways would be treated as any other infrastructure and service industry, which also requires to be improved, invested in, made more competitive. Advancing the date was dictated by a reasoning that there was nothing sacrosanct about the 28th of February. Earlier, the timing used to be 5 p.m. because it was linked to the GMT timing. And we continued that practice for almost 50 years. So the government had changed the timing, and therefore the date had to be advanced because you wanted the expenditure to start in Q1 rather than wait for Q3 because of monsoons intervening. And so too the obliterating of this distinction between planned and non-planned expenditure. The overall approach in the budget really was that this was a year which we needed to improve upon our spending. Fully conscious of the fact that a bulk of the spending has to come from the government. And that spending is really required to spur growth and create an environment in which eventually the private sector would also pick up. And our priorities were also very clear. We had to concentrate on agriculture and the rural sector. We had to concentrate on infrastructure. We had to expand on the social sector schemes, particularly the more successful ones. And therefore, we went on that track. Almost everyone got bigger grants, and then we were, of course, constrained by the factor that we needed to have fiscal prudence. So in a period of 2 years and 8 months, it's not merely that from 4.6 we've now come down to 3.2. I think what's also more important than maintaining the path of fiscal prudence is also the quality of that fiscal deficit. Today the Revenue Department will tell you that there are no held up tax refunds. Today we have not cut expenditure in order to maintain the fiscal discipline. In fact, in the current year and the last year, consistently the revised estimates in the budget are higher than the budget estimates. And that's partly because in both years the revenue buoyancy has been about 17% each. Having said this, I think this budget comes in the backdrop of certain important changes and reforms which have taken place. In the coming year, we await the GST, and therefore only for a few months we saw no reasoning in altering either the excise duties or the service tax, because that will converge into the GST in the course of the year itself. The progress is significant. As far as the demonetization is concerned, we must bear in mind that whatever are the revenue and other gains of it may not have been fully factored in. Because as against a 17% growth in revenue in the last 2 years, we've actually put it at 12% this year, a target which we could surpass. This year our collections are higher than what we had anticipated, and hopefully we'll maintain that course even next year. The fact is that we have a realistic target in mind, and that really takes us to 3.2 and eventually 3%, and in accordance with the fiscal roadmap that we've planned ourselves. We've also carried on the reform process itself. We have a much higher target for disinvestment because eventually more and more PSUs, including the GIC companies, are going to be listed this year. And in accordance with the listing requirements, will require to divest a part of their equity also. Time has now come to abolish the FIPB, because 90% of the foreign direct investment coming into the country is, as it is, coming through the automatic route. And therefore, in the course of the year, we'll be laying out the entire roadmap for the FIPB abolition itself. We intend listing several PSUs. It'll be make them, their functioning more transparent, they make them more competitive. And a lot of values would then be known when they get listed onto the stock exchange. I have mentioned some of them. The taxation approach was also absolutely clear. Our steps against shadow economy would continue, and that's why we put this cap of 3 lakh rupees on the cash transactions. Hopefully, once the GST is implemented, the scope for generation of more black money itself becomes more difficult. the curbs on expenditure being put will provide a check to the expenditure of that black money, and hopefully the steps which the Revenues Department has taken and the fallout of the demonetization, I think is significantly going to change the pattern of spending behavior as far as consumers are concerned. Normally, budgets are known for imposing higher taxations, but except for the surcharge in the category which Naushad doesn't like, I think there is an equity in the wealthier paying more, because I have also in the budget document consciously given some data to indicate how much of a non-compliant society we are. And therefore, one of the efforts has been to make the society more compliant. Because if we seriously introspect, the data itself reveals, and if we keep those 56 lakh salaried assessees out, the voluntary taxpayers above 5 lakhs, which includes the whole body of business people, traders, professionals, lawyers included, and doctors, you find that there are only 20 lakh people in this country who declare voluntarily an income more than 5 lakhs a year. Now, this is something which is absolutely incredible. And therefore, the fact that more and more people have to be tempted or incentivized to get into the tax net is one of the factors which is responsible for this tax policy, which is reflected in a lower percentage of tax in the 5 lakh and less category, that by paying almost very little or negligible amount of tax, you can enter the tax net. And obviously, in a non-compliant society, the state needs resources. And the resources will have to come from the more affluent as far as the tax structures are concerned. There is a social equity also behind this. In terms of the corporate tax, I had earlier announced that it would be linked to the phasing out of the exemptions. Now, phasing out exemptions ahead of the time itself may create a problem, because people have planned their industries in that manner. But this concession that we made for 96% of the companies, which is the MSME plus sector up to 50 crores of turnover, is dehors that phasing out of the exemption. And the data analysis by the Department of Revenue clearly shows that this is a segment which is still paying over 30% if you include the surcharge. The average of the big boys who haven't got the benefit of this is that they are in any case paying 25% or less. And therefore, there is a rationale without the phasing out of the exemptions to restrict at the present moment this reduction to those who are effectively and de facto paying 30% and above, and not those who are in any case paying 25% or less. So there was an important rationale as far as this is concerned. The last point before I leave enough time for an interaction is this entire debate on political funding. We tried one experiment earlier by saying that if you donate by check, the donor gets a deduction as an expenditure, and the political parties, if they file their returns, also get exempted from payment of tax. This has only marginally worked. Some part of the political donations have started coming by check, but that's only a small percentage. The bulk of it still never came by check. And therefore, our consultations with a very large body of people revealed that for good reason, the donors wanted to donate tax-paid clean money for a political system. After all, in a parliamentary democracy, elections are a part of democracy. Political parties are a part of democracy, so we've devised a system by which there is some element of confidentiality involved, but the money becomes absolutely clean. You can donate money to or contribute money to a political party by check. You'll be entitled to a deduction. We would like to incentivize people to give small donations in very large volumes through the digital mode. That's what's happening in other democracies in the world. I think that's a mode which requires to be encouraged. Election Commission suggested that reduce cash donation from one source to 2,000. We accepted that suggestion. If the Election Commission has any other suggestions, we are quite open to considering it. And lastly, this whole concept of electoral bonds, which can be purchased from the notified bank under the scheme, and the notified banks would sell these bonds against cash, against check payment or digital payment only. So it will be tax-paid clean money on which these bonds would be purchased. The donor knows who he has donated or given this money to. Every political party will have to notify one account to the Election Commission within a very short period of time, which will be notified in the scheme. It will be days, not months. These would be redeemable only in that account of a political party. So in the hands of the recipient, it will be clean money. In the hands of the donor, it will be tax-paid money. Now a question has arisen, why don't you disclose everything? Now the tragedy of this country is that there are a large number of so-called well-meaning people who have a problem for every solution. And therefore, disclosure would again mean going back to the status quo. And that status quo hasn't worked. And therefore, this new scheme is being experimented, and I hope if anybody has any suggestions to improve upon this scheme, we are always willing to consider it. But I don't think going back to the existing status quo, which hasn't worked, is really an answer. And therefore, I do hope that consistent with our stand, that we want clean businesses, we want people to get rid of black money, and therefore, out of the electoral system, we try and eliminate black money. This is a very important step which has been taken in this budget, and I do hope it's a step which deserves to be tried, and I have not the least doubt that if one or two elections are contested on this particular pattern, we'll see a significant amount of clean money getting into India's democratic elections itself. That's all I had to say in my opening comments. I think we'll leave the rest for interaction.
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया माननीय श्री अरुण जेटली जी का. And now we will start our interactive session. We will take 10 questions, 2 questions each from SOCHM, FICCI, CII, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Indian Chamber of Commerce ICC. और इस इंटरैक्टिव सेशन के लिए सबसे पहले मैं एसओचएम से आमंत्रित करता हूं श्री राहुल गर्ग जी को, जो कि चेयरमैन है नेशनल काउंसिल ऑन डायरेक्ट टैक्सेस एसओचएम. श्री राहुल गर्ग.
So this is the question on your comment on the society being largely non-compliant, and that is really significant revelation in the budget document and in your speech. In relation to that, we wanted to know that is there a measurement in your mind that on 10-point scale, what's the compliance today and what's our target, in what time we want to achieve that?
Well, I won't give you any measure of it, but I think in some case facts speak for themselves. I would like each one of you to notionally in your own minds think in terms of what percentage of tax that we get as direct tax and what percentage what we get as indirect tax, and how much of it is really evaded. And if the evasions to that level didn't take place, then all these debates which take place every evening on television, would we have more money for the Indian army? Would we have more money for the Indian villages? So what you are actually evading as a society is what in terms of both security of the country, administration of the country, and for various developmental programs and poverty elimination programs is what we are denying to those people. So I don't want an answer, but everybody can make his own estimate of how much of indirect tax and how much of direct tax is really evaded. And if we had in terms of, at the end of the day, if you look at, you are spending a couple of lakhs of crores every year on developmental activity in this country. Now, easily this amount could be multiplied. And it would be multiplied in those sectors which needed it. And that's the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Now the next questions come from FICCI. मैं अनुरोध करता हूँ डॉक्टर ज्योत्सना सूरी, चेयरपर्सन एंड मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर द ललित सूरी हॉस्पिटैलिटी ग्रुप. डॉक्टर ज्योत्सना सूरी.
Namaskar, sir. Granting of infrastructure status while highlighting its employment potential to affordable housing is a welcome move, sir. In your budget speech, you acknowledge the role of the tourism industry in job creation. In view, may I once again, on behalf of the tourism and hospitality industry, request a similar sympathetic consideration to grant us the infrastructure status. This, sir, will boost the growth of the industry and in turn generate more employment.
Well, I think it all depends on how much the system can absorb. I see merit in what you say, and we'll take note of it.
Thank you very much, sir.
और मैं आमंत्रित करता हूँ श्री विनायक चटर्जी को सीआईआई की तरफ से, जो कि चेयरमैन है सीआईआई नेशनल कमेटी ऑन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर एंड पीपीपी एंड चेयरमैन फीडबैक इंफ्रा प्राइवेट लिमिटेड, श्री विनायक चटर्जी.
Speak closer, it's on, just come closer. Second mic. Use your.
Is this better? Okay. So,
Right person.
thank you. Sir, my question largely relates to the very complex and knotty problem which has been alluded to, which is the twin balance sheet problem. Very high level of stressed NPAs in banks and very stressed corporate balance sheets, which are impeding the infrastructure sector and, more importantly, impeding the ability of private sector to come back with a bang on infra investments and PPPs. All of us have been trying to grapple with the solutions, but an interesting solution has been offered in the economic survey by the chief economic advisor. I think since the time the economic survey came out, many of us have debated it, discussed it, and we find the suggestion eminently suitable for the times, which is the PARA, the Public Sector Assets Rehabilitation Agency. The idea has been fleshed out also. The traction for the idea from industry is good. And the question to you, therefore, sir, is what are your thoughts on carrying this suggestion forward?
You see, the economic survey always carries and is supposed to carry, and it's a good thing that it does, ideas for a discussion and maybe eventual implementation, even if you can't do it immediately. And therefore, to that extent, we take that suggestion on board. Even otherwise, this whole suggestion which has been mooted of the bad bank, even earlier, now we'll take this suggestion on board for consideration. But eventually, what emerges out of the solution, I won't be able to comment at this stage. I don't want to get into a situation where the whole business of asset reconstruction, for which we've just had a large, we widened the policy, we've had a lot of investment coming into that sector, a lot of companies have come in. And while that is happening, we don't want a situation eventually to converge, that it eventually again becomes a government issue, and then the whole thing has to be supported only out of the budget and not otherwise. Let that sectoral activity which has expanded move on. We'll take that suggestion on board. It's also a possible solution.
Next question from Mr. Gopal Jivarajka. He's a PhD Chamber of Commerce. He's President PhD Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Gopal Jivarajka.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank you for accepting and acknowledging and reducing the corporate tax on MSME and also recognizing that that sector is a big job creator. I would just like to pick two parts of your speech and would seek your elaboration on this. The first one is you mentioned about the government will ensure honest taxpayers are treated with dignity and courtesy. And second, you said about the simplification of labor laws into 4 codes. I would just like a little elaboration on both these things, sir.
You see, the Labour Ministry is already working on it. And the 4 sectors of labour law, they are trying to codify and recodify that. That's a document which I have elaborated, which are the 4 heads. It will be simplified because a lot of changes have taken place. And of course, they'll have to do this in consultation even with those involved in the labour movement. Because those involved in the labour movement at times have some suggestions, particularly with regard to their own welfare measures itself. Now, as far as tax administration is concerned, the Department of Revenue has been trying to ensure in step after step and using technology for that purpose to minimize the interaction between the assessee and the department. For instance, today, your filing of returns, your queries being addressed to you, your assessment orders, your refunds, these have all moved online. Except that very rare case of scrutiny where a personal hearing would be required. For instance, in this new round after demonetization, these unexplained deposits, which don't match the profile of the depositor, they've already identified 18 lakh such cases. Now, even in those cases, they are not sending a notice. They are just sending a communication to the person concerned through the electronic mode and seeking his response to the electronic mode in case he has some clarification to offer. He goes and deposits the tax, which is a more favorable rate before the 31st of March. Or he faces whatever consequences are if he can't explain. So that's the broad approach that they've been trying to follow. And I think a lot of changes that they've been making with the use of this technology are moving further. But then I'm conscious of the fact that it's the same set of people, some in your fraternity who don't pay taxes and some in that fraternity who exploit that situation. So the DNA is really the same.